Promoting brand trust. Now this is thoughtful. Hello, I'm Trevor Lai in Shanghai. While China has grown into one of the world's leading consumer markets, the reputation of homegrown brands, both at home and abroad, has been mixed. Many companies, Chinese and foreign, have been accused of cutting corners to lower costs, leaving consumers wondering which products and brands they can trust. This week on Thoughtful China, our panel experts Brian Cronkite, Ellen Ho, and Elan Shou will share some of the issues that can tarnish a brand's image in this market, tips to improve your brand's reputation, and what to do if trouble hits. And Scott Kroenig will share a thought or two about why the trust factor is even more important in China than anywhere else in the world. But first, with us now is Stephen Cao, CEO for Greater China at Edelman. Stephen, thanks for coming in today.
Thank you.
Edelman conducts an annual global study, the Trust Barometer, to measure the trust between companies, media, governments, and NGOs and their audiences. So let's take a top-line look at how Chinese entities are measuring up in these four areas.
So in general, we see overall, rising trends for all level of business. We didn't look into the difference between MNC and local business. But interestingly, we have another kind of finding is that in China, big companies look more trusted compared to small companies. While the situation in global perspective is different. For global findings data, we found that family-owned business is more trusted than large companies.
So corporations in North America or Europe, for example, actually enjoy a lower trust level than family-owned businesses?
In global landscape. But in China, listed company or large company is more trusted than smaller business.
Do you think that in time, China will also trend towards where the international market is right now in terms of?
Yeah, might be, because, consider the history of a Chinese company. We see the longest history for the company or brand can be 20 years, 30 years, right after the China conducted development reform. So I think that's one of the reasons. With the growing of the China economy and the more years of history of the brand, probably people will have a diversified, opinion towards different kind of brand.
So when you take your trust barometer, can you break that down a little bit so we understand what factors that the audience is taking into consideration when they say, I trust large companies or local companies versus other ones more this year versus last year? What are some of the factors that you're looking at?
Right. I think we have actually 5 clusters and also 16 attributes in a way to evaluate audience trust towards a company or corporation. So that's in addition to the operational factors. We also view that integrity, transparency, engagement we call. So that looks like taking more important role than previous just operational factors.
So engagement would be, for example, social media interaction with the audience?
That's true, which means engagement, which means at least you need to have a transparency system to continuously communicate with the audience, with your stakeholders. And also in terms of engagement from senior level, we can see also they have expectation for the CEOs to more participate in the conversation with the audience, with the customers.
So speaking of transparency and communication, obviously some Chinese companies have had issues in the past, let's say in baby food, or baby formula in that
That's
area.
True.
So do you think that the Chinese companies are doing a better job of communicating with their audience and therefore are able to, gain more trust from the market?
Overall speaking, actually, we have a deep insight in terms of industries. We found different industry got different level of trust in China. For example, technology is the most trusted industry in China, followed by consumer electronics and automotive. Speaking of food and beverage, you mentioned that's really is a challenge for China. They're ranked the second least trusted industry in China, and the least trusted is entertainment. Which means, though overall speaking, compared the data from 2013 to 2004, we see a little bit rise, but still they're ranking in the bottom, which means that's in line with recent issues for food and beverage, the product safety issues, etc. So I do think the business leaders in this industry should take the lead to more actively communicate with stakeholders, with consumers, especially the business, in a leading position. I believe they have even more responsibility to communicate on behalf of the industry.
So just so we're clear, when you say they rank, let's take food and beverage, for example,
Sure.
second to last, does that mean that overall in your international study that the world looks at Chinese food and beverage companies and ranks them second to last in terms of trust as a sector? Or do you mean within China, Chinese consumers look at food and beverage as second to last in terms
Sure.
of
Actually, the survey we conduct is country by country, which means we view the data from China, then the data will reflect result of China. We don't have cross-country comparison in terms of industry. But in line with your question, I think we do have another finding is overall speaking, countries or companies from emerging market is less trusted than developed market.
Well, the reason I ask is precisely because on our show we talk a lot about how provenance is a value that helps French brands or Italian brands and German brands. But Chinese brands are still struggling to build that sense of value and to say that made in China could be a good thing. Although, as you mentioned, in technology, when you have companies like Lenovo, for example, continuing their acquisition spree, abroad, that helps them in technology. How do you think companies in food and beverage, for example, can help improve themselves in the international standings?
Okay, before I touch that topic, I think overall speaking, that's still in line with our also emerging market trust barometer we did last year, focus on emerging market. So not only for China, companies headquartered in all emerging markets, India, Russia, Mexico, Brazil, they are all facing a challenging trust issue in developed market. And also for global perspective, we can see the companies headquartered in Germany, Switzerland, Sweden is most trusted. So that's overall landscape. But in terms of the topic you mentioned about food and beverage industry, yes, I believe, first of all, if there are countries in China, developing or emerging market, they are less trusted, right? The second thing is, of course, if they are specifically in this industry, they should even take more action on how to improve their status of trust, especially for the CEOs to proactively communicate or engage with the environment, and even they should call on for kind of a collaboration with the government, because we can see from the audience that they are also expecting a higher involvement level from government to have more regulation on this kind of industry. So we believe the opportunity there for the business is actually they can collaboratively work together with the government to change the situation and improve the status of trust.
Stephen, thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you.
Let's take a break to hear from our sponsor, and then Scott Kronig, President and CEO Asia Pacific at Ogilvy Public Relations, will share a thought or two about why the trust factor is more important in China than anywhere else.
Now, let's go!
Trust, as defined by Webster's, is a belief that someone or something is reliable, good, honest, and effective. Trust is a word that has become part of our everyday conversation. People trust each other. Bosses trust their employees will get the job done. Clients trust their agencies will deliver the goods. Consumers trust promises made by companies and brands. And almost everyone in business knows brands cannot exist without trust. In fact, if a brand does not have trust, its long-term success is dubious. Marketers throughout the world work to understand consumers in every shape and form to ensure their products or brands build a trusting relationship with them. So in China, how is this different? I would argue the trust factor is even more important in China than anywhere else in the world. Why? Because although many argue China's market is maturing, the environment for brands to strive and thrive is in its infancy. By virtue of its youth, the importance of consistency, of delivering on a promise in a reliable and honest way, is all the more important. China is also a market that is seeing new brands emerge every day. Without some differentiation and claims that are backed by evidence and an emotional connection, trusting relationships will never be formed. Not to mention, such relationships take time to develop. But most importantly, the Chinese culture is one that centers around relationships. Relationships that are strong are built on truth, honesty, and reliability. And those that are weak, well, let's just say, those are relationships you can do without.
Thanks, Scott. We're back in our studio with Brian Cronkite, Managing Director of Burson-Marsteller's Shanghai office, Ellen Ho, Chief Strategic Architect at McCann World Group Greater China, and Elan Shou, Managing Director China at Ruder-Finn Public Relations. Brian and Elan, let's start by taking a look at brand trust from a PR perspective. Obviously, in recent years, some Chinese companies have run into issues in this area, and sometimes with tragic results. Have you noticed that Chinese companies have improved in the way that they handle PR relations in terms of brand trust and building that with consumers?
Well, I guess I can kick off first. Actually, I think there are significant improvements if you see what these Chinese companies have been done in the past years. I think they've learned their lesson and understand how reputation is important to the company development, even to their sales.
So can you talk about some specific, tactics or specific approaches that you've seen Chinese companies take in improving?
Well, I mean, to me, I think what I would look at as an important thing is, obviously you've had the food scandals, you've had pollution issues, you've had IPR issues, all these types of things in the last, 6, 7 years at least. I think it's raised a lot of awareness around the importance of reputation. And I think one interesting thing, if you look at, is corporate social responsibility. So I was looking at the reporting of corporate social responsibility. I was looking at a study that looked at it in 2006. There was one Chinese company that was doing this each year. But by 2012, there was over 1,700 companies doing this each year. So whether those reports are actually factual and as transparent as you'd want them to be, I think that really points to the significance that companies are putting on that.
So they are becoming more active, but in some ways, do you think it's because consumers themselves are becoming more active and vocal about holding companies accountable in China, through social media, and now also the fact that they have more of a voice, whether it's on the social media themselves or actually in how they, voice their opinions to the media in general?
I think the pressure comes from all the different directions. Even the government is asking all the wholly owned Chinese companies to publicize CSR reports every year. So that's come from the government perspective for the sustainable development of a country, of the community. Of course, it needs to be done. And from the company-wise, they need to drive sales. They need to hear the voice from the consumers. From the baby milk powder scandal, what you see is Chinese buying all the milk powders around the world. And the price of international company product actually significantly raised in the past years. All these, I think, led to the Chinese company to think what reputation really means to them.
So Ellen, from a consumer standpoint, do you think that they are so far down the path of, let's just take the infant powder example, that the rebuilding the Chinese brand image is going to take a lot of years? Or do you think that the Chinese themselves do want to trust local grown brands because it is less of a hassle? There is a certain elite aspect of perspective about who can actually access foreign infant powder, for example. Do you think the Chinese are actually rooting for local brands to be able to improve obviously their product quality, but also their brand trust?
Definitely. I think especially if you look at China as a big picture, especially for second tier, even the lower tier, they actually have much more bonding and deep bonding with the local Chinese brand. And in the bottom of their hearts, they do expect that that those Chinese local companies can regain their kind of trust relationship with the consumer. So that's the expectation. And if we observe lots of kind of, especially some large quality local Chinese company, they are changing a lot compared to before. They become more transparent, more open, and more dare to kind of do more aggressive innovation and quality control, and more open to the consumer to share what they are doing. So I do see the positive change is happening there.
Can you give us an example of a Chinese brand that's done a good job, you think, in the last 5 years, really turning around their brand image in the eyes of the consumer?
I can't say it's totally turning around. I actually do see positive progress for those two big names as Mengniu, as Yili. So in terms of their brand communication, in terms of their kind of PR behavior or kind of below the line activation and the new plant building, new technology import, new management team building, all their behavior are the evidence, are the kind of progress of kind of regain the trust.
Brian, do you look at other sectors also feeling the pressure, whether it's banks, for example, which in the past historically weren't really under a lot of scrutiny, but now as they increase the amount of monetary products that they offer to the consumers, do you see them under the same type of pressure?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot of direct experience in the financial sector, probably a little bit more on the food side, but yeah, I mean, I think all these areas have been impacted by some of the quality issues and so forth. So I think anything, if you're going to be trusting your life savings or if you're going to be trusting the safety of your baby, I think all these things are still, there's a very big gap in terms of the amount of trust that people have in these organizations. So there's a lot of work to do still, I think.
Yeah, well, I just want to add on that, with all the work done, that you see the progress, but usually reputation, when there is a scandal, it can be destroyed over the night. But when you want to rebuild the trust and reputation, it usually take a very long time to turn it around. So what we see is Chinese companies are really working on that, whether it has hit the point that it has equal reputation or even better reputation than MNCs. Of course, again, it's case by case, but not yet.
So actually, let's take the instance of where you've tried your best to warn a client and say, avoid a big scandal, but somehow something happens and crisis hits, and they call you in the middle of the night and they say, help us out. Take us like kind of step by step. What's the first thing that you've seen is an effective or at least is a necessary first step? Like, for example, do you advise the CEO to come out and hold a press conference right away to have a direct engagement with the audience?
The first step is fact. Give me the whole story. Basically, tell me what really happened. Are those complaints true? Are you really having all those issues? Because to me, the truth is very important. As an Anthony, we always think we are lawyers to a certain kind of situation in the crisis. We say we need to know the truth. Don't hide and just tell us what really happened. And usually the principles tell the truth, be transparent, be sympathetic, and take responsibility if there is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the point on responsibility is an excellent one, because oftentimes a big mistake organizations make is until they have all the facts, they're reluctant to take any ownership of the issue, and there always needs to be an appropriate level of ownership that you can take. So whether you're fully responsible, partly responsible, the first thing is to be apologetic, address the issue, and demonstrate that you're concerned, and then start demonstrating what actions you're taking to help resolve it. So.
Right. In the past, the public has often given companies flack for when they come out taking too long to acknowledge any sort of wrongdoing. And you see that they often cite the fact that the CEO will come out and not seem contrite. They'll seem defensive and immediately say, we don't know all the facts and things like that. So you would really advise your clients to be more open and perhaps err on the side of taking more responsibility than less, and then sort of, working back from that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fine line. I call it ownership, so owning the issue, and so whether that means that you're saying that we did this, you may not have those types of facts to claim, but I think definitely being genuine in your approach to resolve the issue.
And also, maybe I'm more like the voice of consumer here today.
Very important.
So interestingly, if you observe brands' behavior, brands, normally like to treat themselves as brands. but actually the key thing is see yourself as a human being. Human makes mistake. Don't be shy to apologize, to share the wrong thing you have done. But the most important thing is, what thing you want to correct. What's your behavior, what's the whole story, like Ilan said, what's the whole story and what you are going to do. So with the transparency, definitely consumer as people who already built long-term connection and relationship with the brand will kind of have the empathy with what you have done. So that's
well, speaking of the human touch, how important are KOLs now in helping to mitigate any sort of these crises? Obviously, the corporation, the executives have to step out front, but do KOLs ever play a factor in helping to mitigate? Or not
It's such a great question, because KOL today is playing such a significant role. No matter it's traditional communication or it's online communication, we all know those KOLs online are so influential with thousands of fans. The question I always have is it a real KOL? Or a bought KOL, and I believe consumers are smart and they will be able to identify who's the real, who's the paid. I think that's a place that we need to be very cautious, especially in crisis.
Do you think KOLs actually have suffered an image crisis perhaps in the past few years from being perceived as being bought, especially when you look at Weibo, for a while they actually went into a trend where at one point they were very credible, KOLs on there, and then all of a sudden you started seeing these retweets and posts and things like that where their fans would say, you know what, this doesn't sound like you anymore. It sounds like you're being sponsored to talk to us.
This goes back to today's topic, which is great. It's about reputation management. It's not only corporate and also brands need to manage their reputation. Everybody has a reputation, including key opinion leaders. They need to treasure it. They need to use it properly. We need to still remember the CCTV story about I was sent this message at 111. That's not right. That's not ideal for KOL's reputation.
So, in terms of ranking, who has the most credibility with the Chinese consumer today? If you look at executives, bloggers, celebrities, do you ever do studies that rank, who has the most trust from a personal perspective?
Yeah, I mean, there's mixed data on that. So, in my opinion, that it really comes down to who you're trying to reach. So, for example, if you are a fashion brand, if David Beckham wears your shirt to a movie premiere, that's a great KOL. But if you're trying to reach mothers for baby products, David Beckham's probably not the right person, but maybe mommy bloggers are. Or, so it just depends on the message, the medium, and who you're trying to reach ultimately.
Adding on that, I think I would rather say real story is the most trusting rather than, which figure. And when you talk about KOL, to me, actually, your fans are KOL, right? Not necessarily the famous bloggers. And the CEO is the KOL. If he keeps sustaining conversation, or a sociable CEO might build more reputation, more connection, more trust points than a kind of a CEO only exposed when problem is popping up. So that's the point of view. The real thing, I love the word real, is the key thing.
So do you think a CEO like Jack Ma, for example, who has a very palpable sort of personality and is very active on the speaking engagements, you think someone like that would be viewed with more trust than a CEO who might be actually really good at his job but doesn't engage his community actively?
I think it's not about style. So it's not mean a CEO needs to be expressive all the time, but a CEO should kind of expose the company's story, in a sustaining stage rather than only once on TV or only once on media. So he can, or he can use his management team or leadership team to review the story, not only rely on one person. Yeah.
Brian, Ellen, Ilan, thanks for being on Thoughtful China.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That wraps it up for today. Be sure to subscribe to us on Youku, Tudo, and YouTube. You can also follow us on Weibo and Twitter and join our LinkedIn group. We'll see you again.